In this video, I'll be going through how I would solve the Stillwater Hotels case. The case is sourced from Joshua Carr, who has a series on YouTube on real estate financial modeling and is also the principal of Carr Real Estate. If you haven't checked out his series, I would highly recommend it. But since this case isn't solved yet, I decided to provide how I would approach it. The case asks us to analyze a 500-key hotel at $250,000 a key on a 5-year hold period. We're given growing NOI margins, occupancy, and ADRs over a 4-year period, and we're also given a debt component to analyze. We're expecting to sell this hotel for 12 times its trailing 12-month NOI and have a variety of costs associated with acquisition and disposition. And finally, we're asked to come up with the unlevered and levered IRR, whole dollar profit, and equity multiple for the investment, sensitizing our model for hold period, exit multiple, acquisition cost, loan to cost for our debt component, and interest rate. Now let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to zoom out here and then also expand the columns so that we can get to work. I'm going to begin with building the number of months under analysis. And I'm going to set the number of months in this model to 84, even though we're initially solving for a 5-year hold period. And that's because the case asks us to look up to 7 years out in our sensitivity analysis. So I'm going to build out those extra 24 months ahead of time. I'm also going to add some borders here, which is really going to help dragging formulas as I continue to build out the model. Now for the building of the number of years, I'm building out 7 total years. And the easiest way I found to match the number of months to the correct year is to use that round up formula. Now the case doesn't specify a start date, so I'm going to assume year-end 2021. And I'm going to use the end of month formula to pair each month with its respective date. And I have to build out the dates to find out the number of days in each month. Right, as this is a hotel model, the number of days in each month is important. With the same occupancy percentage, you sell more rooms in a month with 31 days than in a month with only 28 days. Now with occupancy, the case gives us occupancy by year, which makes it really easy to use a VLOOKUP. And I look up the year, match it with the occupancy table, and set the range lookup to an approximate match so that we can go past year 6 in the table. And with ADR, I can use the exact same strategy, matching the year in our analysis with the year in the ADRs given. And finally, RevPAR is just the sum of occupancy and ADR. Now I'm going to set the occupancy formatted as a percentage, and the ADR and RevPAR as currency, just to make things pretty. Operating revenue is a function of 2 variables, RevPAR and the room's revenue variable given by the case. That means that the room's revenue formula is simply the revenue per available room multiplied by the days in the month, multiplied by the number of rooms in the hotel, times the room's revenue percentage. And the F&B formula is the same thing, taken the inverse of the room's revenue percentage. And what I'm doing here is dragging out the operating revenue and formatting our entire pro forma so that we don't have dollar signs all over the place. Now, the case doesn't specify how to build out departmental expenses, but I think that without departmental expenses, our pro forma would be too bare bones. And I went ahead and assumed that the room's revenue expense is 35% of revenue, and the F&B expense is 70% of F&B revenues. So to calculate the room's expense, I simply take the room's revenue times the room's revenue expense percentage. And then for the F&B expense, I simply take the F&B revenue and multiply that by the F&B expense percentage. Because we have an NOI margin to target, building out the departmental expenses won't change the answer of our case. It just makes the model look a lot better, in my opinion. Gross operating profit is the departmental revenue less its associated expenses, and the gross operating profit margin is the gross operating profit as a percentage of revenues. As I mentioned, the case gives us an NOI margin to target. So I'm going to use the same VLOOKUP strategy, looking up the year in the NOI margin table, and then using an approximate match. And then I multiply that NOI margin percentage by the total revenues. And then as a sanity check, I recalculate the NOI margin, dividing NOI by revenues. Next, I model the undistributed expenses. The case gives us an FF&E reserve, so that's the first thing that I calculate, taking the FF&E reserve percentage, which is 4%, and multiplying that by the total revenue. And then the remainder of the undistributed expenses is just the GOP margin, less the FF&E reserve, less the net operating income. And just as a check, I'll just make sure that my NOI is my GOP less expenses. Now for my capital events, purchase price is straightforward, it being the number of keys multiplied by the price per key. In this case, 500 times 250,000. Then we also need to take 2 percentage points of that acquisition price and add it as an expense as an acquisition fee. Now, sales price is a little bit trickier because we're using a trailing 12-month NOI multiple. So this model only works if the property is sold in month 13 or later, because we won't be able to calculate a sale price without 12 months of previous revenue. So multiplying the previous 12 months times the NOI multiple, and I also build in the correct sale date by setting the month equal to the sale year multiplied by 12, or in this case, 60. The sale fee is simply a percentage of the sales price. And as you can see, in month 60, or at the end of year 5, we have our capital event. To calculate unlevered cash flows, I sum all of the capital events in the respective month, as well as the monthly NOI. Now, I also only take cash flows during the analysis period, and do that by only taking cash flows whose month is less than the hold period multiplied by 12. And I do that so that all of my return metrics are based off the hold period, but I can still calculate the model in its entirety. Now, unlevered IRR is a little bit tricky, because if I just use the IRR formula, I get this tiny return. That's because it's the return per month. So to get the correct return, I annualize the monthly return, accounting for monthly compounding. Whole dollar profit is just a sum, nice and simple. And equity multiple is the positive cash flow over the negative cash flow. I used a SUMIF to calculate that ratio. I can even add a little x to the equity multiple to make it pretty. Zooming out, I've calculated the unlevered cash flows, and I'm ready for the next step, adding leverage and sensitizing my returns.